Come on in, pull up a chair, and take a load off, because today I'll be sharing a peek at, as well as my review of, Dungeons & Dragons Candlekeep Mysteries from Wizards of the Coast. Are these 17 investigatory adventures perfect for players and dungeon masters of all stripes? Or are there only two mysteries here? One, why did Wizards of the Coast produce this book? And two, why in the world would you buy it? Well, you're going to find out right after this. Howdy, 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 gang. Welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. As I mentioned in the open, I am going to be reviewing Dungeons & Dragons Candlekeep Mysteries in just a moment. But first, let me mention, if you would like to win my copy of the alternate art edition of Candlekeep Mysteries, keep watching, because I will reveal how you can get into the running, and it won't be very difficult at all. Do want to point out, though, I am not going to tell you about the contest at the end of this video. You got to keep watching to find out. So there's that. All right, I am going to be sharing a bit of a peek at, as well as my review of Dungeons & Dragons Candlekeep Mysteries from Wizards of the Coast. Obviously enough, this is for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Clocks in at 224 pages, and it does carry an MSRP of $49.95. This is already out in stores. Let's swing on over to the other camera, because here I've got Candlekeep Mysteries. So something I do want to point out is that the fine folks over at Wizards of the Coast were kind enough to send me this review copy, as well as that alternate art edition that I'm going to be giving away. But it's important for you to know that neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share my thoughts about this book. It's very important for you to know that, because there are a lot of paid promotions out there. This is certainly not one of them. So Candlekeep Mysteries contains 17 adventures. They are not tied together. This is not a campaign book. All of these adventures are standalone. Now, that does not necessarily mean that they are only one gaming session long. They are just standalone adventures on their own right. So also something I'm going to point out is that there's no narrative thread that runs throughout this as well. These are 17 adventures, all from 17 different authors with different developers and editors as well. There's a bit of a discussion from the folks over at Wizards of the Coast that this is kind of a throwback or a bit of an homage to magazines dedicated to Dungeons & Dragons in the past. Or so probably Dungeon Magazine. And that is both good and bad. And I will talk about that when we kind of get into my final thoughts, as well as my review score. So what we're going to do, I'm going to dive in. I'm not going to page through every page here. I am going to share a little bit of the book so you can get an idea of what the artwork style is, what it looks like. But it is not a complete page through. So first off, let's jump on in here, because it's the book's going to kick off with a couple of pages basically dedicated to running these adventures, talking about a little bit of a breakdown of what each of these adventures is. That's about all you're going to get as far as a summary for many of these adventures. Some of the adventures do have a little summary portion to them, but for the most part, they do not. And I know that'll probably throw some people off a little bit, but this is an adventure book. This is not a player-facing book. This is for dungeon masters. And I would think if you're purchasing this book, aren't you going to read all of the adventures, regardless if there was a summary or not? I don't know. But I know Some people out there will probably be a little disappointed that when we take a look at the adventures, we don't have like a little summary box right here for them to take a peek at. Next up, we've got a few pages devoted to Candlekeep itself. These adventures are set in the Forgotten Realms. If you are not familiar with Candlekeep, it is a fortress. It is a citadel to knowledge, effectively. And the reason why it's called Candlekeep is from a distance, there are all these towers that rise over these high walls, which looks like candles on a cake. So that's why it's called Candlekeep. To be able to enter Candlekeep, you have to bring a book, a tome that they do not already have a copy of. So we get a few pages devoted to Candlekeep, some of the important personages as well. There is a poster map at the back of the book that comes out that shows you Candlekeep as well as the important personages and areas of Candlekeep. So the first adventure we have is the Joy of Extradimensional Spaces. This is for first level characters. It is written by Michael Polkinghorne. And in this, the adventurers are actually asked to try to track down a missing sage. There are actually two adventures in this tome that kind of revolve around finding a missing sage. And it's possible that maybe the last book they were reading has something to do with that disappearance. Maybe. Do want to mention, I am going to stay as spoiler-free as I possibly can throughout this, even though I'm going to give you a little bit of a summary of each of the adventures and maybe talk about some of the adventures I think stand out that are my favorites in this book. Once again, this is not a player-facing book. This is a dungeon master-facing book. There really isn't anything in here that's aimed at the players. So if you are a player and you're hoping that your dungeon master will at some point in the future run any of these adventures, then I would definitely recommend either tuning into another one of my videos, see you later, or just skip ahead to my final thoughts and review score. Once again, I will not have any spoilers in that, but that'll give you a better idea of what I think of the book overall. As far as this adventure, I like this adventure. It's got a lot of different things that are very appealing to players who are not overly familiar with Dungeons and Dragons. Experienced players who are creating first level characters, maybe they won't find as much to like with this adventure as newer players to D&D. But to me, it's got everything. It's got some investigation. It's got some social interactions. It's got some combat. It's got interactivity in it. So I do actually like this adventure, and I think it kicks off the book rather nicely. That said, do want to point out that some of these adventures are really on rails. Almost all of them are very linear. And I know a lot of people out there, they enjoy more sandboxy adventures. I'm an old school Renaissance sort of person, so I tend to, as far as my fantasy role-playing games, tend to like a bit more of a sandbox vibe to it. But that said, having spent 40 years running Call of Cthulhu, I don't really have anything against, linear adventures, because for the most part, the vast majority of Call of Cthulhu adventures are going to be relatively linear. That said, some of the adventures are really on rails, so I do want to point that out. Second adventure is Mazgroth's Mighty Digressions. It's a second level adventure written by Alison Huang. Also, I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce tons of people's last names in this review, and I do apologize up front for that. I'm doing my best. I treat English like a second language anyway. So with this, I would say you don't judge a book by its cover. And again, maybe it's not even a book. So this is an adventure that will take the player characters to Baldur's Gate. And some of these adventures don't necessarily always start out in Candlekeep, but there is a tie-in to Candlekeep. This actually does start in Candlekeep. And I like this adventure as well. I thought this adventure is pretty interesting. I like the payoff at the end. So let's continue along. We've got our next adventure is from Chris Perkins. It is for 3rd level characters, and this is Book of the Raven. So something that you've probably already noticed is on the first page of each of the adventures, there's an image of a book. Because yes, each of these adventures does have some sort of a tie-in to a book. So if you are a bibliophile, you will probably get a kick out of that. That said, it's not always going to revolve around the book itself. There's tie-ins to them, but it's not always that, the answer is going to be found within the book or by focusing on the book. So with this adventure here, I got to say, it's always nice to find a surprise between the covers of a book. Even when I'm not talking about pages, I'm talking about a treasure map. So one aspect of this adventure is that if you have not run Curse of Strahd, or maybe you're in the midst of kind of tying some Curse of Strahd activity into your own campaign, this makes for a very nice segue into that campaign. Something that does happen with a lot of these adventures is that we'll find callbacks to previous D&D books, many of the adventure campaign books as well. Something else that this adventure contains is a bit of a retcon on the Vistani from Curse of Strahd. So a bit of a change to that culture. So that is Book of the Raven. Next up, we've got A Deep and Creeping Darkness, which is written by Sarah Madsen. This is one of the longer adventures in Candlekeep Mysteries. What happens here is there's been a mine disaster near the town of Vermilion, and everybody from the town has disappeared. Now, have they been abducted? Have they just run off? I don't know. So the player characters are actually hired to find out what exactly has happened. And they might find themselves traveling to Candlekeep to do a bit of research to get them on their way. Once again, this is not an adventure that actually begins in Candlekeep, but at some point, the player characters will actually be in Candlekeep, and that's when they will experience a deep and creeping darkness. So the funny thing is, each of the titles of the adventures is actually the book's title as well. So I thought that was kind of interesting too. All right, moving right along. We actually have 2 4th level adventures in the book, which I thought was kind of interesting. But one thing I will mention for those of you out there, let's cover that up. So it's like, okay, because that's kind of a spoiler right there for that adventure. But I was going to say, a lot of times with in investigative adventures for Dungeons and Dragons, when the player characters start getting into higher levels, they kind of fall off the cliff a little bit as far as mysteries go, because the player characters have a lot more powers, especially the magic using characters, that they may not necessarily have to do as much exploring because you're, investigating, because, hey, there's Speak to the Dead, right? So one thing I do have to point out as far as these adventures in this book is that they hold up pretty well, even at the higher levels. Granted, I know we're only at 4th level here, but that's something I did want to mention. Now, This is one of the adventures I really like as well. And if you've ever had a song stuck in your head, you will certainly appreciate this adventure. So this kind of revolves around a children's book, which is actually a pop-up book, which is kind of interesting as well. In fact, you know what? I will actually show you. There we go. So there's an image of the pop-up book. But something else that takes place in this adventure, which is kind of a tie-in to what's been going on here the past year, is the player characters will find themselves in quarantine. So it maybe hitting a little too close to home. Then we've got The Price of Beauty, which is for 5th level characters. It's written by Mark Holmes. And this is an interesting adventure because, once again, what's in the eye of the beholder? And when I say beholder, I'm not talking about the monster. I'm talking about beauty in the eye of the beholder. Players are going to find that not everything is always what it seems to be. And they're going to encounter a trio of elves from the Temple of the Restless Lily. So this is a pretty interesting adventure as well. So let's continue moving along, because then we've got the Book of Cylinders. This is for 6th level characters. It's written by Graham Barber. And what happens here is the player characters find this book that teaches them how to make a trio of cylinders, which, when used almost like as for printing, actually tells a story of a village of frog folk that are being attacked by these serpent people. Thing is this a story from history, or is this a story that's actually unfolding right now? That's one of the aspects of this. One of the cool things about this adventure is, and once again, I've pointed out time and time again, when we're talking about from 1st edition to 5th, right about the beginning of 2nd edition, I didn't really see much D&D stuff. Once again, I've run Call of Cthulhu for 40 years. So that was my focus. But then once we got, I peeked at some of the 4th edition. And then, of course, once 5th edition came along, I'm pretty well versed in it. There's actually a race of frog people that, from my understanding, has not been seen for a long time in Dungeons and Dragons, and they make their return here in this adventure. So that is something for folks to look forward to. Next up, we've got a ghost tale. It is Sarah of Yellowcrest Manor. And in this adventure, the player characters find themselves approached by a ghost. Yes, there was a mass, basically a mass killing that took place in Waterdeep a few years ago. And one of the victims, the aforementioned Sarah, seeks the player characters out. Well, one of them is reading essentially her diary and implores them to find out, why did this massacre take place? One of the interesting aspects that is important for dungeon masters to keep in mind is Sarah cannot speak. So that will kind of throw some wrinkles into this as well. And kind of a cool adventure, a little dark, especially because this massacre wiped out an entire household of people. So a family and their servants, including children. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind as well. So if the player characters can solve this mystery, they can actually put all of these ghosts, all these restless spirits, back to rest. And this is one of the longer adventures in the book. For the most part, these adventures average about 11, 12 pages. Some are a little shorter, some run about 10 pages, some run a little bit longer, but on average, they're about 12 pages long. Then we have, I should point out that Sarah of Yellowcrest Manor was written by Derek Ruiz, and it is for 7th level characters. Now we've got Lore of Laurue, which is for 8th level characters. This is written by Kelly Lynn D'Angelo. And this revolves around the player characters being drawn into a fairy tale book. Literally, they find themselves on a demiplane, which is a forest, and there is a mysterious blight that is striking the trees in these woods, and the player characters have to find out what is the cause of this blight. We'll mention as we start getting into the higher level adventures, we do see some demiplanes coming into play here, which I found kind of unusual. That, I guess maybe not that unusual, but we see it quite a bit with the higher level adventures, which I think there's a little too much of that in the book. All right, moving right along, let's swing back over to the other camera, because I'm going to tell you how you can win my copy of the alternate art edition of Dungeons & Dragons Candlekeep Mysteries from Wizards of the Coast. This is my copy. If you are the winner, I will send this anywhere in the world that I can legally send something in the mail or what have you. There's some countries that, can't send stuff to from the United States. So bear that in mind. But if you'd like to get into the running to win this copy, all you got to do are 3 things. First off, be a subscriber to the channel. That's easy enough. Second, comment on this video. And when I say comment, you don't have to blow smoke up my butt, but don't be rude. I'm not going to give things away to people who leave rude comments. It's just how I operate. And of course, if you leave a comment saying what the timestamp is for this contest, I will delete that comment and block you from the channel. So keep that in mind as well. Third thing you got to do, comment on any other video. That's it. So from the time this video hits, which will actually be March 19th through March 28th, subscribe to the channel, comment on this video, and comment on any other video, be it one of my reviews or unboxings or first looks or any of the 633 episodes of the live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, that I host Monday through Thursday nights. Easy peasy. On the 28th, I will choose the winner and reveal that winner on the live episode of the Gaming Gang Dispatch. Simple enough. All right, let's move on to our next adventure, because it is actually, I think this is kind of my favorite adventure. Let's get over to the correct page here. And it is Candlekeep Dekonstruction. This is written by Amy Vorpal. Kind of like the sword, right? But spelled differently. This adventure is for 9th level characters, and there is a lot to like about this adventure. It is fast moving. It doesn't take itself too seriously. It's a little tongue in cheek. There's some good factions. In fact, one thing I will point out throughout the vast majority of the adventures in this book, they've got some pretty good villains. And some villainous cultures get a little different treatment too. So kind of turns that on its head, which I know Wizards of the Coast is trying to do. They're trying to get away from all orcs are evil, all goblins are evil, all kobolds are evil. So I find this pretty funny, and it's kind of along the lines of Dungeons and Dragons in Space. Maybe. So I think this adventure would probably turn out to be a lot of fun for both the players as well as the dungeon master. So I'm up in the air. I really do like this adventure. I don't want to say yes, it's my favorite in the book, but it is certainly in the running. All right, moving right along, we have our next adventure, which is, let's cover that up. Let's go away from some spoilers there. Zikran's Zephyrean Tome, which is written by Tamor Riem. And this is another kind of interesting adventure. And the players find a genie, but it's a genie in a book, not a genie in a bottle. And that genie promises them a wish if they can find a way to release the genie from his entrapment, which is easier said than done because keep in mind, this is for 10th level characters. So it's not going to be real simple. There are a few ways to go about doing it. So keep that in mind. It's not just one way or the highway as far as getting it done. So next up, we have the Curious Tale of Wisteria Vale, or Wisteria Vale. This is for 11 level characters, and it is written by Kiana Shaw. And this story revolves around a play in 3 acts in which the player characters encounter a once good bard who has been corrupted by evil. Now, can the player characters end that corruption and save the bard? I don't know. You'll have to play it to find out. There's a bit of a spoiler there. I'm going to cover that up. Next up, we have the Book of Inner Alchemy, in which the players are trying to find some lost pages of the titular book, and that brings them into a headlong collision with the monks of the Immortal Lotus. And if you are a fan of Asian-themed adventures, or, I always get the pronunciation of this genre of anime and manga and things like that wrong. Wuxia or Wuxia or Wuxia. I've heard it pronounced umpteen different ways. But that is really the vibe from this adventure. In fact, this adventure does share a lot of those traditional beats that you find within that genre. So if you enjoy those kind of stories, you are certainly going to like this adventure. All right, moving right along, we've got the Canopic Being, which is for 13th level characters. It's written by Jennifer Kretschmer. And this is where the characters are once again investigating the disappearance of a sage from Candlekeep. Now, this time, this adventure here actually becomes a ticking clock. Actually, I take that back. The next adventure is that. This one here is the fates of the player characters are actually tied into this, and it's their free will. So as opposed to finding something or saving someone or something or tracking something down, the actual player's free will is what's at stake in this adventure. This adventure has a very cool Egyptian theme to it. This is also one of my favorite adventures in Candlekeep Mysteries. This is also kind of vying for that top spot. And definitely dig it. And it's, like I said, it's got a really nice Egyptian vibe. If you like kind of desert adventures, this is certainly one to keep an eye out for, to hopefully be able to run for your group. All right, next up, this is the adventure where it's actually kind of a ticking clock. The Scrivener's Tale, which is written by Brandis Stoddard. This is for 14th level characters. And the player characters are marked for doom. They're basically marked for death, but it's for doom. So in order to save themselves, they're going to find themselves in Baldur's Gate. Once again, I like the fact that a lot of these adventures kind of call back to locations from other books, other adventures as well. So this one's pretty good. Pretty interesting adventure as well. I like the fact that the player characters are running out of time. I know sometimes that can be a little difficult for dungeon masters to run. But then again, this is for 14th level characters. So if you're running this adventure and you're a dungeon master, you've probably got a few solid campaigns under your belt. So it shouldn't really be too much of a problem. Okay, moving right along. We're getting close to the end. In fact, this is the second to last adventure. Alkazaar's Appendix. So the player characters are tasked with trying to reunite a wandering stone golem. This is another desert-based adventure, so you could very easily kind of tie this in as well. You could give it more of an Egyptian theme also. So you're looking to try to reunite this stone golem with his master, which is easier said than done. And let's talk about our final adventure here, and that is Xanthoria. I should say, if I forgot to mention this, Alkazaar's Appendix is written by Adam Lee. It's for 15th level characters. So Xanthoria is written by Tony Wilson Brill, and this is for 16th level characters. This is the final adventure in Candlekeep Mysteries, and it's an interesting adventure. It might hit a little too close to home, because what's going on is there's a fungal infection. There's a plague, basically, running throughout the Sword Coast, and it affects just about every living thing. And those like humanoids and things like that are being turned into zombies. If it's not something that's got intelligence, it's basically just rotting it. So it's kind of a zombie fungopolis going on that the players need to find out what's causing this and put an end to it before all is lost. This is another adventure that I do like quite a bit. This is kind of a short adventure, but what I really like about this adventure is the fact that the player characters are going to be faced with a dilemma at the conclusion of this adventure, or near the conclusion of this adventure. And it's not going to be an easy choice to make. So don't want to spoil anything else. I don't want to say, oh, there's a twist at the end or anything like that. But I definitely like the ending to this is complicated. It's complex. And I do like that quite a bit. All right. And you'll notice there's no appendix, there's no index or anything like that at the end of the book. We simply go into contributor bios, and then we've got the pull-out map. This is a poster map of Candlekeep, as well as the other side has personages, important NPCs, and places in Candlekeep. So that is Dungeons & Dragons, Candlekeep Mysteries from Wizards of the Coast. Let's swing on over to the other camera, because I will share my final thoughts and give this a review score. All right. So I had pointed out that there had been discussion that Candlekeep Mysteries is kind of a throwback, kind of an homage to magazines that were devoted to Dungeons and Dragons back in the day. A little bit Dragon, but mainly Dungeon Magazine. And Dungeon Magazine, for those of us who have been around a long time in the gaming hobby, newer people to the hobby probably look back at Dungeon with like rose-colored glasses, I guess, because they probably have never picked up an issue of Dungeon. It's probably kind of like, wow, that'd be so cool to have that now. Well, to be honest, most issues of Dungeon sucked. So you'd have maybe 4 or 5 adventures in an issue of Dungeon, and you would be lucky if one of those was actually pretty good. So when there was discussion, oh, well, you know, this is a throwback to those like magazines that focused on D&D, I was kind of like, okay. All right. So I got to point out there are no like major stinkers. Just there's no adventure in Candlekeep Mysteries that I'd be like, oh, I'm not running that. No way would I run that. That said, there is no adventure in this book that I would run as written. Some of them I would tweak a little bit, others probably quite a bit. But each of these adventures does have some interesting premise at its heart. And we can't always say that about every Dungeons and Dragons adventure. I was a little concerned that I thought that this book would feel rushed. And I don't want to say that, but I will say that the book does suffer because of the fact that there is no overarching editor. Each of the stories have development by various different people, editing by various different people. So there is not a uniform voice that runs throughout the book. I don't want to say it's mishmash, hodgepodge, but it's close. So I do want to mention that as well. Some things that people are going to be kind of curious about, scratching their heads about. I've pointed out there's no appendix. So there's no dedicated section at the end of the book to new monsters. There are a few new monsters, not a ton, but there are a few. New magic items, things like that. Things that people are used to seeing in their Dungeons and Dragons books. I know some people are going to be upset about that because they'll want to use those monsters and those magic items in their own adventures that they concoct or in published adventures that they're running that they want to plug those into. I got to be honest, it didn't really bother me much because all that information is located right in each adventure. I've said it time and time again. I've run Call of Cthulhu for a long time, and that is how Call of Cthulhu adventures tend to be. Your NPC stat blocks, your monster stat blocks, your creature stat blocks are all located in the adventure near where you would need them. So I actually appreciate it. I know people out there are going to disagree with me on that, but I like the fact that you've got that information there where you need it in the adventures themselves. There are some standout adventures here. Not all of them are standouts. Out of the 17 adventures, and of course your mileage is going to vary, I would think most dungeon masters are going to be able to get 5 or 6 adventures out of this book that they would certainly be looking forward to run. Some more, some less. All depends. Like I said, your mileage will vary, but there is something for everyone in this book. Something I really do like about it is not just overwhelming combat throughout. And I know there are people out there, they love their combat in Dungeons and Dragons. I get it, but I happen to be old school. So I like to have combat, of course, but I don't want it to be an entire game session just filled with one fight after another fight, just wave after wave of monsters attacking and combat. There are some adventures in this book you can easily come to a successful conclusion without ever resorting to any sort of combat in the adventure. I definitely like that as well. As far as some things that just I'm not a big fan of, but they're kind of just D&D things. Some of the adventures do utilize the whole, well, you need to pass this DC or we're not playing Dungeons and Dragons tonight. There were a couple of examples that I saw that were kind of like, but what we see far more often, which is also another head scratcher of mine, is that it'll call for a DC roll, and the player characters, if they succeed, then they receive some piece of information. They receive something that is of use, that is of value. But if they fail, they're going to get that exact piece of information or thing of value some other way. It's just going to be given to them. So in essence, it becomes, well, why do you have them roll for it in the first place? The premise of Dungeons and Dragons isn't for people to sit around the table rolling dice at certain points or a certain number of times every session. It's getting together, having a good time, playing an adventure and creating your own story. That's the point. So that throws me off sometimes. And I know we see it in a lot of D&D adventures. All in all, though, I like Candlekeep Mysteries. Like I said, some of the mysteries are sort of, I guess I'll say underwhelming. They're not terrible. They're just not jumping out at me. They're not something where I'd be like, wow, I really do want to run that. That'd be very cool. But also have to point out there's some really, really good adventures in here where I'm like, wow, that looks like that'd be a riot to run. Oh, I could just imagine my players, how they would react to XYZ. There's a good amount of that as well. All in all, I definitely do give Candlekeep Mysteries a recommendation. It's a good book. It's certainly not the worst 5th edition book that's been released by Wizards of the Coast by a long shot. But it's also not the greatest. It's not the best. It's not the ultimate book we've ever seen for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I give Dungeons and Dragons Candlekeep Mysteries a solid 7.5. Definitely recommend it. Once again, I can't say this enough because this is something I think is really going to go for this book. Your mileage is certainly going to vary as far as what kind of review score you would give it. All right, so that is it for this time out. Once again, do want to point out, if you like this video, by all means, give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, ding that bell, because not only will it let you know when I upload videos such as this, I'll also tell you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Monday through Thursday nights right here on YouTube, as I bring you the latest in tabletop gaming news. Also, don't forget, get in the running to win my copy of the alternate art edition of Candlekeep Mysteries. I don't know. I talked about it somewhere in the video. I'm not going to tell you how to win it here. I'm wrapping up. Of course, once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thank you so much for watching. Always appreciate people taking time out of their busy lives to watch this knucklehead pontificate. And of course, as I wrap up all of my videos during this never-ending pandemic, certainly hope all of you out there are being smart and staying safe. Oh, hey, you're still here. Well, if that's the case, by all means, if you haven't subscribed to the Gaming Gang channel yet, click right here. If you'd like to see the latest episode of the Gaming Gang Dispatch, click right up there. And if you want to trust YouTube's algorithm to give you something to watch, click right there. Once again, thanks so much for watching, and everybody please wear a mask.